4 of the world's most haunted places. Some doors should remain closed, but we open them anyway. In today's special episode, I've gathered 4 tales from some of the most haunted places on Earth. So turn off the lights, lock your door, and get under the covers because you're watching Bedtime Chillers.
He was gone for less than a minute. When they pulled him up, he was a stranger. The man they lowered into the darkness was a young, strong prisoner who was sentenced to death. The man they pulled up had snow-white hair, deep wrinkles, in a face contorted by an indescribable terror. He had aged 30 years in the few seconds he was out of sight. He died only 2 days later in a mental hospital without ever being able to articulate what it was he saw down there in the depths. He was the first to explore the hole, and he was the last they ever let do it. Welcome to Bedtime Chillers and the series World's Most Haunted Places. We are starting our new series strong, with a fortress that was not built to keep enemies out, but to keep something in. We are going to the dense forests of the Czech Republic, about 47 kilometers north of Prague. We are going to Hauska Castle, the place that, according to centuries of folklore, is not a castle, but a seal against the other side, a lock built to seal a gate, the gate to hell. Turn off the lights, lock the door, and crawl under the covers. You are watching Bedtime Chillers. On the surface, Hauska is a prime example of early Gothic architecture. It is one of the best preserved castles of its time. The officially accepted history tells that it was built during the second half of the 13th century, probably between 1253 and 1278, on the orders of the powerful Bohemian King Ottokar II. The purpose, according to historians, was to serve as a royal administrative center to be able to manage the king's extensive estates and lands in the region. Another theory is that the house was first built as a prison. That sounds logical until you look closer at it, until you actually visit the place, because the moment you arrive, the official story begins to fall apart. A fortress, or even a simple administrative center in the 13th century, had several fundamental needs. They needed to be strategically located, and they needed to be able to sustain themselves. Hauska fulfills neither of these requirements, which makes you wonder what the real purpose was. If we start by looking at the location itself, the castle is not located near any significant trade route. It guards no border. It is isolated in an inhospitable landscape of dense forests, mountains, and swamps. There is no obvious strategic reason to build a royal castle right here. The second is the infrastructure, and that is even worse. The castle completely lacks a natural water source. There is no well, no river. The only water source was a cistern built to collect rainwater, which was completely insufficient to withstand a siege. Furthermore, there is also no evidence of an original kitchen. It was not built for people to live there. The third is the architecture. This is one of the most significant pieces of evidence. Hauska Castle has no outer fortifications. The castle's main defensive walls are not directed outward toward an attacking enemy, but they are directed inward toward the courtyard's center. Many of the windows on the upper floors are fake. They are just facades, blocked from the inside by thick stone walls. So we have a castle with no water, no food, no strategic value, and with walls facing the wrong way. The official history calls it an administrative center or a prison. The folklore knows better. It says that Ottokar II did not build this as an office or a prison. He built a prison cell. He built a lock over the abyss that the local population feared more than anything else. To understand Hauska, one must understand what was there before Hauska was built. The legend of the place is much older than the castle itself. Before the first stone was laid, there was a cliff in a dense, impenetrable forest, and in that cliff there was a large crack, a hole straight down into the ground. This was not just any cave. The locals called it the Hole to Hell. It was said to be completely bottomless. No one could ever see the bottom, no matter how deep they let their ropes run. The villagers in the area were terrified of the place and avoided it at all costs after dark, and they had good reason. From this abyss, it was said that horrific things crawled and flew during the night. Testimonies speak of dark, winged creatures, but worst of all were the hybrids, creatures described as half animal and half human. These demonic creatures were said to have slaughtered livestock in the surrounding villages and dragged both animals and humans down into the dark hole. Some legends even claimed that those who got too close to the hole risked being transformed into one of these creatures themselves. In desperation, the villagers tried to fill the hole. They dragged heavy boulders to it and hurled them into the abyss, day after day, and it was completely futile. The hole swallowed everything that came its way. No matter how much stone they threw, the depths never seemed to fill up. It was then, once the construction of a fortress began, that the terrible experiment took place. The king or the duke wanted to know exactly what it was they were trying to seal. A prisoner condemned to death was offered a pardon in exchange for a single task: to allow himself to be lowered on a rope into the abyss and report everything he saw. He gladly accepted the offer. They tied the rope around him and began to lower him into the bottomless darkness. He was only out of sight for a few seconds before the screams began to pierce the air. Terrified, inhuman screams that echoed up from the depths of... They pulled him up in a panic. The man they got back, as you know, was unrecognizable. A young man had aged 30 years. His hair was white, his face a mask of terror, and he died shortly thereafter. This was not just a cave with monsters. The prisoner's fate suggested something much worse. It suggested a place where time and space, the very fabric of reality, was completely dissolved. A place that didn't just kill the body, but that could consume an entire life, an entire soul, in just an instant. When the prisoner died, it was clear. The hole could not be filled. It had to be sealed. And if stone was not enough, something even stronger was needed. They needed a fortress, and they needed God. The solution was as desperate as it was ingenious. King Ottokar II built the castle, but not to live in. He built it as a massive, permanent lock. The thickest walls, the strongest reinforcements, were placed facing inward to hold back, with brute force, whatever was in the hole. And right over the abyss itself, as the final spiritual seal, he had the castle's chapel built. This was not just any chapel, it was an act of theological warfare. The chapel is dedicated to the Archangel Michael. The choice was anything but random. In Christian mythology, Michael is the leader of God's armies, the heavenly warrior who personally defeated Lucifer in the Great War in heaven and cast him and his fallen angels into the abyss. By building the chapel, they were placing the most powerful demon fighter in the Christian faith as an eternal sentinel directly on top of the portal. The murals in the chapel are among the most disturbing in Europe. They are worn by centuries, but still show scenes of battle, demon-like figures and unholy left-handed figures. But the seal was not perfect. It was under constant pressure. To this day, witnesses report one of the castle's most inexplicable physical phenomena. The walls of the chapel always seem to be damp, even during periods of severe drought, as if an ice-cold, evil vapor is ceaselessly sweating through the holy stone. The spiritual seal also has a price. It is said to have given rise to this castle's most famous specter, an eternal guardian bound to his post. Visitors and staff report a terrifying figure, a tall black monk completely without a face. He is seen patrolling the silent corridors, not necessarily malevolent, but part of the castle's dark, eternal guard. A castle built to contain evil perhaps inevitably became a magnet for those who did not want to keep it contained, but rather try to exploit it. Hauska's history is not just a fight against the darkness, but a fight for control over the darkness. During the chaotic 30 Years' War in the 17th century, the castle was occupied by a Swedish mercenary and commander named Oronto, and Oronto was no ordinary soldier. He was, according to legend, a devout practitioner of the black arts and alchemy. He was well aware of the castle's reputation, and unlike the villagers, he was not afraid. He was interested. He moved into Hauska specifically to harness the dark energy he believed flowed from the portal. He locked himself in his laboratory night after night, trying, with the help of the castle's power, to distill the elixir of life to achieve eternal life. Some versions of the legend are darker, claiming that he performed demonic rituals and even human sacrifices to appease the power beneath the chapel. The local villagers, who already feared the castle, now became terrified of Oronto's experiments. They pooled their money and hired 2 local hunters, or perhaps we should call them assassins, to put an end to the madness. They broke into the castle and murdered him. In the midst of his unholy work, Oronto never got his eternal life, but he is said to have received an eternal imprisonment. His vengeful spirit seems to be one of the most active in the castle, forever searching for the ingredients he never found. Several centuries later, an even darker power was drawn to Hauska. During the Second World War, from 1939 to 1945, the castle was located in the German-occupied territory. It was seized and used by the German army, specifically by Heinrich Himmler's SS. Once again, the same paradox arises. The castle had absolutely no strategic value, so why were the Nazis there? The answer seems to be the same as Oronto's. Himmler and the SS leadership were deeply obsessed with the occult and with mystical artifacts. They knew Hauska's legends. They were there on an industrial and systematic scale to try to tame and exploit the power of hell to win the war. Local residents from that time reported dark ceremonies, strange lights coming from the castle at night, and terrible sounds. There are 2 main theories about the Nazi activities, and they do not necessarily exclude each other. One is that they conducted occult experiments, and it is said, among other things, that Himmler ordered the SS soldiers to dig up the gate to the Devil's Hole. The second, more mundane but equally ominous, is that the SS used Hauska as a secure warehouse, but they weren't storing weapons or gold. They were storing parts of their stolen libraries, thousands and thousands of priceless books on the occult, witchcraft, and black magic that they had confiscated from all over Europe. The truth likely lies in a combination. Imagine this: the most ruthless organization in modern history, in possession of the world's largest collection of occult instruction manuals, at the very place known for centuries as the Gate of Hell. They weren't just storing books, they were studying them and practicing them. When the tide of war turned and the Allies approached, the SS destroyed all records of their activities at the castle and filled in the gate to hell. They also laid landmines throughout the entire area. To this day, over 75 years later, the castle's current owners have not dared to conduct any large-scale excavations in the basement for fear of hidden mines. With all the evidence destroyed, we will likely never know what the Nazis actually did at the castle during those years. Hauska opened to the public in 1999 and is today a popular tourist attraction. But being a tourist destination has not silenced the darkness. Quite the opposite. The place is a global hotspot for paranormal investigators and ghost hunters. The most persistent and terrifying testimonies are the sound phenomena. Visitors, guides, and investigators all report the same thing: the sound of screams, and most specifically, the sound of claws scraping against stone. And where do these sounds come from? Well, from under the chapel floor. The sound of something that was sealed away over 800 years ago and is still tirelessly trying to dig its way out. Besides the sounds, the list of recurring phenomena is long and bizarre. There are the shadows said to roam the castle's corridors, the remnants from an abyss that the castle was built upon to seal. The faceless monk is a dark figure, sometimes seen in the cellars. Some legends say he is the eternal guardian of the gate, a monk still patrolling his post to warn of what lies below. Witnesses have seen him floating silently, as if looking for something, before vanishing as he approaches the stairs. The White Lady, one of the castle's more tragic figures. She is described as a young woman in a white dress, often seen on the third floor, or as a grieving figure in one of the uppermost windows. Her story is believed to be one of lost love and betrayal. She is said to wander in eternal sorrow. Several other observers have reported the sight of a large black horse galloping silently across the inner courtyard. The sight is made even more gruesome by the fact that the horse has no head, and some testimonies describe how blood gushes from the severed neck. And perhaps the most disturbing is the creature that has haunted visitors and investigators for decades. It is often described as a human frog, a twisted hybrid between human, frog, and sometimes even dog or bulldog. This creature is said to move, crouching through the castle's dark corners, sometimes growling or grunting to itself. Many believe that this is not a ghost in the traditional sense, but one of the demonic human beasts that, according to legend, crawled up from the abyss before the chapel was built to seal it. This last observation is also the most frightening. The original 13th century legend speaks of half-animal, half-human hybrids that crawled up from the hole. The modern-day reports of a frog-human are not a new haunting. It is a direct confirmation of the original myth. It is proof that the seal is not, and perhaps never has been, completely tight. The castle has become popular among paranormal investigators globally. Famous international teams like Ghost Hunters International and Sweden's own Spukjakt Ghost Hunt have all investigated the site, and their conclusions are eerily consistent. The results are not just sporadic, but consistent. The pattern is clear. Technology that has just been fully charged fails the moment it is taken into specific rooms. Cameras freeze, audio recorders go silent, and batteries drain completely in seconds. The phenomenon even extends beyond the walls. There are multiple reports of cars parked in the courtyard that suddenly refuse to start, as if an invisible force is shutting down the electronics. Animals react with instinctive terror. Dogs that are normally calm become completely panicked, barking aggressively at empty corners or refusing outright to set foot over the threshold to the chapel. Several investigations, including a noted Czech one in 2014, have presented remarkable findings. They reported particular success in capturing EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, where clear whispers and answers seem to come from thin air. During one séance, they recorded 2 deafening, unexplained bangs that echoed from inside the locked and verifiably empty chapel. Perhaps most frightening was when one of their rigged stationary cameras was suddenly and violently moved physically, as if an invisible hand had shoved it aside. But there was nothing in the room. The activity seems to consistently culminate around 3 in the morning, which is known in the paranormal world as the demonic hour. A well-known story from an investigation tells of a reporter who was monitoring the chapel. Suddenly, at exactly 3 a.m., both his heart rate monitor and his walkie-talkie died instantly. At the same time, his mobile phone, which was lying untouched on the table next to him, had its alarm mysteriously reset and activated right before his eyes. Hauska Castle is a castle built of fear. Officially, it is an administrative center or a prison from the 13th century, a historical monument of stone and mortar. But the folklore, the bizarre architecture, and 8 centuries of uninterrupted testimonies tell a completely different story about the place. A story of a bottomless abyss, of demonic hybrids, and of a desperate attempt to lock hell on Earth. Generations of darkness have been drawn to this place, from the Black Magician Oronto to Himmler's SS. They have all wanted to pick the lock, to open what King Ottokar II desperately tried to close. The true horror of Hauska Castle is not that it is a gate to hell. It is that 800 years ago, people were so completely bottomlessly convinced that it was, that they built an entire fortress with the lock on the inside, and the scraping sounds from the chapel floor make us all ask the final terrible question. What if they were right? This was Hauska Castle.
Forget everything you think you know about haunted houses. Forget creaking floors and cold spots. This is not an ordinary ghost story. We're talking about a place a bishop called the most evil he had ever visited. A place where a man was dragged, screaming, from his bed by a demonic force on his very first night. We're talking about ritual daggers and the skeletons of children discovered beneath the floorboards. And we're talking about a building deliberately erected on a 5,000-year-old pagan burial ground, directly over a crossing of energy lines. Not a house, a portal. Welcome to Bedtime Chillers. This is the ancient Ram Inn, and whatever lives inside, it's been waiting for us. The story of the inn's modern terror begins in 1968. The building, then a pub, had served its last beer and was declared derelict. It was scheduled for demolition to widen the road. A man named John Humphreys bought it for the meager sum of £2,600, intending to save and preserve the historic structure. He didn't know he had just purchased a life sentence. It was 1968. John Humphreys was an ex-soldier, a large, strong, and pragmatic construction worker. He was not the type to be frightened by creaking sounds in the night. On his very first night in the house, he received his welcome. He had gone to sleep when he was suddenly awakened by an indescribable cold. An icy, inhuman force had grabbed his arm. Before he could react, he was torn, screaming, from the bed and onto the floor. An unseen, demonic presence dragged him across the floorboards toward another part of the room. John fought back with all his strength, but he was powerless. His daughter, Caroline, has recounted his horrifying story of how he felt his wrists being pulled backward as if they were being dragged straight through the solid wall. That first night was only the beginning. John's wife, Mary, and his daughters, Caroline and Julie, were also terrorized. They were subjected to violent poltergeist activity, saw shadow figures rushing through the corridors, and felt a constant, oppressive, malevolent presence. They were pushed on the stairs and heard inexplicable whispers. Soon, the terror was too great. John's wife and daughters fled the house, refusing ever to return to live there. But John stayed. He had bought the house to protect its history, and he refused to let the darkness win. He saw himself as a guardian. For over 50 years, until his death in 2017, he fought a lone battle against the spirits that resided within those walls. He was often forced to barricade himself in his living room at night, but he never abandoned his post. John was alone in his war against the darkness for 50 years, but you don't have to be alone in the dark. This is exactly the kind of true, terrifying location we explore in our series. If you, like us, dare to stare evil in the face, make sure you follow the world's most haunted places right now. Hit the subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a terrifying update. Turn off the lights, lock your door, and get under the covers, because in this episode of the world's most haunted places, we ask, what did John Humphreys unleash? The answer isn't a simple ghost. It's a perfect storm of evil, built on a foundation of blood and dark rituals. To understand Why the ancient Ram Inn is such a paranormal magnet, we have to dig, literally, beneath the floorboards. The house's evil doesn't come from a single event. It's an accumulation of millennia of darkness. The stories, repeated for decades, claim the inn was built directly on a 5,000-year-old pagan burial ground, a place of ritual and death long before the first stone was laid. The location isn't just a graveyard, it's a crossroads. The house sits precisely at the intersection of two powerful ley lines. Ley lines are believed to be ancient, straight tracks of energy connecting sacred and geologically significant sites. The energy from one of these lines is said to flow directly from Stonehenge itself, while the other is linked to Glastonbury Tor. These lines act as a highway for spiritual energy and are believed to feed the paranormal power of the inn. The building itself was erected around 1145. Its original purpose was to house the workers, masons, and, according to some, slaves who were building St. Mary's Church across the street. To build the church, they had to divert a stream that flowed on the property. According to legend, this diversion of running water tore a rip in the spiritual fabric. It opened a portal, unleashing the dark energy bound to the pagan land. But these weren't just theories for John Humphreys. He found the evidence. While working to restore the house, he made a horrific discovery. Hidden beneath a staircase and in an open, grave-like hole in the old bar area, he found the skeletons of several children. Even more terrifying, alongside the small bones, he found ritual daggers. Some sources claim the daggers were broken, a known ritualistic method to bind a spirit or ensure the weapon could never be used again. The skeletons weren't buried, they were sacrificed. John also found other artifacts suggesting witchcraft and devil worship. One report claims the University of Bristol confirmed the age of the daggers, strengthening the theory of ritual murder. What makes this discovery even more sinister is the silence. Archaeological reviews of the area have noted that, despite the widespread claims, there are no official archaeological records of a pagan burial ground at this specific site in the national databases. However, this doesn't dismiss John's findings. Quite the contrary. The lack of an official cemetery makes the discovery of ritually murdered children under his floor even more terrifying. It suggests a hidden, secret, and profane history that was never meant to be discovered. A house with such a violent foundation becomes a magnet for tragedy. The ancient Ram Inn is said to be home to over 20 specific spirits. Some are tragic, others are predators. Most of the phenomena are not random. They are direct, specific echoes of the horrific events that have occurred. A house with such a violent foundation becomes a magnet for tragedy. The ancient Ram Inn is said to be home to over 20 specific spirits. Some are tragic, others are predators. Most of the phenomena are not random. They are direct, specific echoes of the horrific events that have occurred. We begin on the top floor, in the room known today as the Witch's Room. Legend says that in the 1500s, during England's witch panic, a woman accused of witchcraft sought refuge here. She was no witch, likely just a pagan, or a woman who threatened the local church's power. But the inn was no sanctuary. She was found, seized, and dragged out to be burned at the stake, according to some sources, on the orders of the priests from St. Mary's Church across the street. Her tormented and vengeful spirit is said to have returned to the room where she was taken. The echo of her fate is horrifically literal. Those who have challenged her presence or shown a lack of respect have fled the room with inexplicable, painful scratches and sometimes even burn marks on their skin. Above in the attic echoes another tragedy from the 1500s. An innkeeper's daughter, sometimes called Elizabeth, is said to have been murdered up there. Some sources say she took her own life by hanging. Others, that she was murdered and hanged to cover up the crime. Regardless, her death was violent. Her presence isn't just known in the attic. The echo of her death is not subtle. For those who try to sleep in the bishop's room below, They often report being woken in the middle of the night by the unmistakable sound of something heavy, like a lifeless body, being dragged across the floor directly above their heads. Moving downstairs to what is called the men's kitchen, the room believed to be built directly over the original pagan grave, the most heartbreaking sound is heard. Visitors, investigators, and John Humphreys himself constantly reported the ghostly, shrill screams of a wailing infant. This isn't a faint echo. It's a persistent shriek of terror. It's believed to be the direct, horrifying echo of the child skeletons John found buried in the cold earth, sacrificed to dark forces. And then we have the staircase, a site of two distinct and terrifying phenomena. First, this is where a young girl named Rosie is said to have met her end. According to John's daughter Caroline, Rosie was chased, thrown down the stairs, and died instantly from a broken neck. The echo of this violent act is interactive. Many visitors, while walking up the stairs, have suddenly felt an unseen force violently shove them in the back, as if Rosie's spirit is trying to stop them from meeting the same fate, or is simply reliving the violence. Second, the staircase is the location of one of the most famous photographic pieces of evidence ever taken in the house. In June 1999, an investigator took a photograph that clearly shows a man-sized, swirling white mist ascending the stairs, like a spirit in motion. The house seems to record and replay its worst moments over and over for anyone who dares to watch. All haunted locations have an epicenter, a heart of darkness. If the ancient Ram Inn is a portal, this is the room where that portal is widest. Welcome to the Bishop's Room. This is the most infamous, most feared room in the entire house. It was this room that John Humphreys himself, the man who endured demonic attacks for 50 years, avoided when he could. He said he always knocked 3 times on the door before daring to enter, not out of politeness, but out of pure, learned respect for whatever now owned the room. It's a room with such a heavy and immediately malevolent atmosphere that one investigator, a medium, couldn't even make it inside. Merely by opening the door, she was allegedly lifted off the ground and violently thrown across the hallway by an unseen force. Why is it so active? The room was historically used by priests and bishops from St. Mary's Church across the street. Today, their spirits, described by many as dark monks, are still said to watch over it. But they are not alone. Look at the fireplace. One of the house's most brutal legends is of a man who was murdered right here. He allegedly had his head repeatedly forced into the burning fire until he died. The echo of this isn't a quiet sound, it's a horrific, tormented man's scream that is sometimes heard echoing from the cold hearth. But this room also functions as a portal through time. 2 plumbers who were working in the room in the 1970s. They fled in a panic and never came back. Why? They saw a fully equipped Roman centurion riding a horse straight through the wall, across the room, and out the other side. But the most terrifying experience in the Bishop's Room is physical and modern. In a corner stands a specific chair. An investigator who visited the site described the incident. The oppressive feeling I felt was so intense, it literally terrified me. I struggled to get my breath and had to leave the room. Her husband, a skeptic, then took her place in the chair to prove it was nonsense. It was literally 2 minutes later, she recounted, when he suddenly started choking and gagging and left the room to go straight to the bathroom, convinced he was going to be sick. They call it the choking chair, a fitting name in the most haunted room in England's most haunted house. Tragedy and violence breed ghosts, but the rituals John Humphreys found evidence of, devil worship and child sacrifice, they invite something much worse. The former Bishop of Gloucester once visited the site and called it the most evil place I have ever had the misfortune to visit. He didn't say most haunted, he said most evil. That is a crucial distinction. This is where we must speak of the non-human entities. The tragic spirits, like Rosie and the wailing child, are the first level of the haunting. The violent ones, like the man in the fireplace, are the second. But the ancient Ram Inn harbors a third, darker level. John Humphreys didn't sleep in the bishop's room. He slept on a sofa in another room, which he claimed to share with the most infamous of the Ram Inn's inhabitants, an incubus and a succubus. An incubus, a male sex demon, and a succubus, its female counterpart. These are demonic entities said to feed on the energy of the living, often through sexual assaults on sleeping guests. John claimed he was attacked regularly. Some visitors are said to have been so terrified by these nightly assaults that they jumped from the windows to escape. And in the barn, a 7-foot-tall, over 2 meters, dark figure is said to watch, hostile to men, but strangely partial to certain women. This is no longer a simple haunting. This is a demonic infestation, likely invited and anchored by the dark rituals and blood spilled on this unholy ground. Today, the ancient Ram Inn lives on. After John's death in 2017, responsibility for the 800-year-old dilapidated building fell to his daughter, Caroline Humphreys. Imagine the irony. Caroline was one of those who fled the house in terror as a child. Now she has returned, not to live there, few dare, but to manage her father's legacy. A heavy burden of damp, rot, and demons, driven by a duty to honor the man who sacrificed everything for a building. The site has become a global mecca for paranormal investigators. Famed TV shows have flocked here, leaving shaken. The team from Ghost Adventures was here for their Season 2 episode. Host Zach Bagans described a rage sensation in the bishop's room, a sudden violent aggression he attributed to a dark entity. And the team from Project Fear conducted one of their most terrifying investigations ever here. They were so shaken, they unanimously called the house demonic and evil. They reported being physically pushed, hearing doors slam in locked rooms, and communicating with a dark force that actively terrorized them through the night. And so, in a final grim irony, the paranormal has become the house's only lifeline. Caroline Humphreys has been open about the crushing maintenance costs. The building is Grade 2 listed, meaning every single repair costs a fortune and must be period accurate. She has said that the pandemic and the lack of visitors nearly broke them financially. John Humphreys bought the house to physically save it from demolition. His paranormal experiences and horrific discoveries are what created the house's modern, dark reputation. Today, it is only the income from ghost hunts, guided tours, and paranormal events that pays for the upkeep and saves the house from crumbling. The house needs its reputation to survive. It needs people to come there to be terrified. The evil has become its own business model. The ancient Ram Inn is more than a haunted place. It is a wound in the landscape, a crossroads of energy, a trap for the dead, and a port for the inhuman. And John Humphreys, the guardian who refused to leave in life, is now said to have joined the other spirits. Many investigators report feeling his presence, a gruff but somehow protective figure, still guarding his property. He who saved the house from a physical death has now stayed forever in death, a prisoner in the very place he tried to preserve. The question is not if you will encounter something at the ancient Ram Inn, but what you will encounter.
The world's most haunted forest. Most tourists who travel to Transylvania are looking for Dracula. They are looking in the wrong place. The locals know the real nightmare doesn't live in a castle, it lives in the woods. Welcome to Hoya Baciu, or as it's more famously known, the Hoya Forest, the place they call Romania's Bermuda Triangle. This is what we know. A shepherd and his 200 sheep walked into the fog here. They vanished without a trace. A 5-year-old girl went missing. She was found 5 years later, wearing the exact same clothes, not having aged a single day. This isn't just a ghost story. This is a place where time itself collapses, a place that leaves physical burns on those who visit, a place that isn't just a forest, it's a portal. Welcome to Bedtime Chillers. This is the third episode in our new series, The World's Most Haunted Places. In previous episodes, I covered Hauska Castle and the Ancient Ram Inn. If you haven't seen those yet, they're linked in the description below. If you, like us, are fascinated by the darkness and dare to stare into the abyss, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell right now. We'll be traveling to places like the Ancient Ram Inn, Poveglia, and the Aokigahara Forest. Hit the like button to show the algorithm and the forest that you're not afraid and to guarantee you never, ever miss an episode. Now, back to the woods. The nickname Bermuda Triangle is no accident. Just like its namesake in the ocean, Hoya Baciu is infamous for unexplained disappearances and technological failures. It suggests the danger here isn't a simple ghost, but that the place itself is a hostile anomaly. The first thing that hits you in Hoya Baciu isn't what you see, but what you don't hear. The silence. It's total, unnatural, even in the middle of a sunny day, when a normal forest would be teeming with life. It's quiet here. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. It's a heavy, deafening silence that settles over you like a blanket, and the only clear pulse is your own. And then you see them, the trees. The second thing you notice is that nothing is straight. The trees here, they're just wrong. They grow in ways that defy the laws of nature. Instead of reaching for the sun, they twist in agonized spirals, almost always clockwise, as if trying to unscrew themselves from the cursed earth. They bend at sudden, impossible 90-degree angles. Some grow in perfect zigzag patterns. Many of them have an inexplicable burnt or charred appearance on one side of the bark, even though no fires have been reported in the area. Scientists have come here for decades, desperate to find a logical explanation. They've tested the soil for toxins. They've blamed wind, heavy snow, unique local conditions, but every theory falls flat. Because the eeriest part is the contrast. Just a few meters outside the forest's official border, the trees grow completely normally, straight and healthy. It's as if an invisible, circular boundary has been drawn in the ground, and everything inside it is tormented by an unseen force. Some trees are more than just twisted. They're inviting. They grow in pairs, their branches intertwining tightly to form perfect, almost architectural archways. Locals and the guides who dare to venture here point to these as literal portals. It's as if the forest itself, in its agony, is trying to show you the way to the other side. The environment here isn't just a backdrop to the myth. It is the myth. This fear is ancient, rooted deep in the soil itself. The forest bears the name of its first and most famous victim. The legend, whispered from generation to generation, tells of a shepherd named Hoya Baciu. Centuries ago, he led his flock, a flock of 200 sheep, into the fog that often creeps between the twisted trees. He never came out. Search parties were sent. They found nothing. No man, no sheep, not a single bone, not a tuft of wool, not even a shepherd's staff. It was as if they had never existed, as if the forest and its misty portal had swallowed them whole. A man can get lost. A man can be attacked by predators. But 200 sheep, they don't just vanish. That isn't a disappearance. It's an erasure. This ancient legend establishes the first and most fundamental fear of Hoya Baciu, that you can walk in and simply cease to exist. But if the shepherd's fate was erasure, the most terrifying legend, the one that truly defines Hoya Baciu's power over reality itself, is much more recent and much, much worse. The story, now a central part of the forest's mythology, is about a 5-year-old girl. She was playing at the forest's edge. Just like so many other children, she disappeared. The search operation was massive. Police, dogs, hundreds of volunteers. They combed the forest, but found nothing. The family mourned. The years passed. Life moved on. Exactly 5 years later, another family was walking through the same part of the forest, and there, crying by a twisted tree, sat the missing girl. She was alive. She was wearing the exact same clothes as the day she disappeared. Clothes that were neither torn nor dirty. And most horrifying of all, she had not aged a single day. She was still 5 years old. When the shocked onlookers asked where she had been, she said she had only been gone for a few minutes. She had no memory of the 5 years that had passed for everyone else. This is the second and more sophisticated trap of Hoya Batsu. The shepherd represents total annihilation. The girl represents something worse, a loss of time and identity, to come back, but to come back wrong. She was a living ghost, a paradox. Either way, if the forest takes you, you lose. At the heart of Hoya Batsu is a place feared more than any other. It is the epicenter, the place that the other twisted trees seem to point toward. It's known as Poyana Rotunda, the round clearing. Stepping into it is a shock. From the dense, dark, claustrophobic woods, you suddenly step out into a near-perfect circle of open ground. And in this circle, which measures about 100 meters, 300 feet in diameter, absolutely nothing grows. No trees, no bushes, just grass. It's an unnatural clearing, a bald spot in the heart of the forest. Locals believe the place is cursed, that it's where the dark forces gather, and that it's home to the most intense paranormal phenomena. And this is where it gets scientifically creepy. Scientists, convinced there was a logical explanation, perhaps a toxic soil patch, perhaps a rain shadow, have taken hundreds of soil samples. They tested the soil in the clearing and compared it to the soil just 5 meters away, where the tormented trees grow densely. The result? There is no difference. None. The soil in the clearing is perfectly normal, rich in nutrients. Yet no tree, no shrub has grown there in what is believed to be centuries. This scientific paradox is what gives the myth its power. When science investigates a mystery and fails to find a rational explanation, it doesn't make the mystery weaker, it makes it stronger. This scientific vacuum is the perfect breeding ground for theories of curses, portals, and, as we'll see, UFO landing sites. In the 1960s, in the shadow of the Cold War, scientists began to take a serious interest in Hoya Batsu, not for the ghosts, but for the measurable anomalies. One man led this research, biologist Alexandru Sift. From 1960 onwards, Sift, a respected academic, spent countless hours in the forest. He measured its odd magnetic fields, which fluctuated wildly for no reason. He documented the strange light phenomena he constantly observed. He took thousands of photographs, and he captured things, orbs of light, floating between the trees, invisible to the naked eye, but caught on infrared film, misty, humanoid shapes. And in the 1960s, long before the forest became world famous, Sift photographed what he described as a large, disc-shaped flying object over the clearing. Sift amassed a huge archive of photos, measurements, and notes. He was convinced he was on the verge of a groundbreaking discovery about another form of matter or energy. But in 1993, Alexandru Sift died, and just days after his death, his entire archive vanished, stolen, destroyed, lost. His colleague, chemistry professor Adrian Petrutz, managed to save some of Sift's photos and publish them in 1995, but most of Sift's life's work is gone. The fact that a respected biologist collected evidence that then so conveniently disappeared has turned this from a paranormal investigation into a conspiracy. What did he find that was so important it had to be erased? Sift's observations were just the beginning. On August 18, 1968, a military technician named Emil Barnea took his wife and 2 friends on a weekend picnic. They chose the infamous Dead Clearing. Suddenly, around 1 p.m. in the afternoon, they saw it. An enormous silver disc-shaped object hovering and maneuvering silently over the trees. Barnea, a military technician, did what he was trained to do. He documented. He took several crystal-clear photos. Now, we have to understand the context. This was 1968, in Nicolae Ceausescu's communist Romania, a totalitarian state where the Securitate, the secret police, had ears in every shadow. The truth was what the state said it was. Believing in the paranormal, or even worse, UFOs, wasn't just eccentric, it was subversive. It implied a power beyond the party's control, a sign of mental instability, or worse, Western decadence. Emil Barnea, a military technician, had nothing to gain. He had everything to lose: his job, his reputation, his family's safety. But he did it. He turned over the photos, believing the truth was more important. And the consequences, as sources describe them, were terrible. He was immediately fired. In a state where your job was your identity and your declaration of loyalty, this was a social death sentence. He was branded a fool, a liar, a pariah. But his photos, they have never been debunked. They are taken on physical film, in broad daylight, by a trained technician. They remain to this day some of the clearest, most credible UFO photographs ever taken. The fact that he was willing to sacrifice his entire life for what he saw is, for many, the ultimate proof. He documented something real, and this is where we must separate the past from the present. Hoia Baciu isn't just a place of old legends and UFO photos. It's a place that reacts to visitors. Today, right now. The thousands of testimonies collected from tourists, guides, and investigators paint a frighteningly consistent picture. It starts psychologically, as a thin crack in your consciousness, a sudden, overwhelming feeling of anxiety, welling up from nowhere. And the famous feeling of being watched, is an understatement. It's the feeling of being hunted. The heavy, unnatural silence you first noticed transforms into a pressing expectation. Something is watching you from the twisted trees. Then, the technology begins to die. It's almost a ritual. The forest disarms you. Fully charged batteries in cameras and phones, your tools for documenting, your light in the dark, drain in seconds, compass needles spin wildly. Your GPS stops working. You are now isolated, and time itself seems to lose its meaning. Visitors report being in the forest for what they believe is 20 minutes, only to emerge and find that several hours have passed. Just like in the legend of the 5-year-old girl, the forest has taken your time. And then, the attack becomes physical. Once you're disoriented and disarmed, the forest begins to mark you. Visitors come out with symptoms they didn't have when they went in: sudden throbbing, migraine-like headaches, waves of intense nausea, and above all, the inexplicable marks on their skin. We're not talking about mosquito bites. We're talking about angry red rashes that flare up on covered skin. We're talking about the infamous scratches, often in parallel lines of 3, as if raked by an invisible claw, and in some extreme cases, burns, clear, painful blisters that appear from nowhere, as if touched by an invisible fire. But those foolish enough to stay after dark, they see what the forest truly hides. The shadow figures, which were previously just a feeling in the corner of your eye, now seem to detach themselves from the dark tree trunks' humanoid forms that flicker in the periphery. The famous orbs of light, which Sift photographed, now float silently between the trees like spectral sentinels, and they hear things. Clear, disembodied whispers right over their shoulder, but when they turn, no one is there. And most terrifying of all, the sound of women. Sometimes laughing, a mocking, shrill sound. Sometimes crying, like a child, in a desperate attempt to lure you deeper into Romania's Bermuda Triangle. The breadth of these phenomena is what makes Hoia Baciu so unique. It's not a single type of haunting. It attacks your mind, your body, and your technology simultaneously. It's less like a haunted house and more like walking into a high radiation zone or an interdimensional bleed. So, what is it? What is happening in this forest? After decades of research and thousands of testimonies, 3 main theories have emerged. Theory 1, the haunted ground, the most traditional explanation, that the forest is simply a prison for the souls who died there. We have the ancient legend of the hundreds of Romanian peasants who were said to have been murdered and slaughtered here, trapped in a massacre. Their souls, along with the shepherd Hoia Baciu and an even more tragic figure, a lost bride who supposedly rode into the woods on her wedding day and vanished forever, are trapped here. This would explain the anger, the anxiety, the heavy, tangible feeling of sorrow. They aren't ghosts at rest, they are echoes of pure, unfiltered terror, stuck in an eternal loop, and the traces of the Neolithic settlement. It just proves one thing. This has been a place of humans, and therefore death, blood, and rituals. For thousands of years, the ground is saturated. Theory 2, the visitors. This isn't a theory based on folklore. It's based on a chain of evidence. We have Sif's photos, we have Barnea's crystal-clear images, we have the countless modern reports of silent, disc-shaped lights maneuvering with an intelligence that is not our own. In this theory, the round clearing isn't a cursed place, it's a landing pad, an unnatural circle, perfect for a purpose. And the physical symptoms, the twisted trees, it's not paranormal, it's radiation, the throbbing headaches, the nausea, the blisters, classic symptoms of exposure to an unknown energy source. The question isn't if they were here, the question is, why do they keep coming back? Theory 3, the portal, the grand, unifying theory. The one that is most terrifying, because it ties everything together. What if Hoia Baciu is neither haunted by the dead, nor visited by aliens, but that it is a threshold? The theory suggests the forest is a place where the veil between our dimension and another is dangerously, unpredictably thin. A place where reality has fractured. And suddenly, all the pieces fall into place. The missing shepherd? He didn't get lost. He walked through the 5-year-old girl. She walked through and came back. But time works differently over there. The UFOs, not spaceships, interdimensional travelers, using this thin spot as a highway, the ghosts and whispers, not the dead, it's sound leakage, glimpses and sounds bleeding through from the other side, like hearing a neighbor through a paper-thin wall, and the physical symptoms. Getting too close to a tear, in reality itself, is fundamentally damaging to a human body. But then we have the skeptics, because with a place so infamous, come those who want to debunk it. And we have to listen to them. Paranormal investigators like Brian Dunning have analyzed the cases. He argues the dead clearing is just a natural meadow, that the soil there is different, preventing trees. That the strange lights at night? Well, the city of Cluj-Napoca has an international airport. They're just airplane lights. And the old legends, the shepherd, the girl, they are just that, legends. Folklore, uncorroborated by contemporary newspaper archives, and the strongest evidence for the skeptics, the thousands of people, like this Quora user or this YouTuber, who visit the forest and experience nothing, absolutely nothing. They just see beautiful, twisted trees. A local guide, Alex, once said the perfect summary: the forest is only haunted if you bring your own ghosts with you. And that's a comforting thought, but it's easy to say in the daylight. It's easier to be a skeptic from a computer screen, thousands of miles away. It's harder to be a skeptic when you're standing there, as the sun goes down, and the silence becomes deafening. It's harder when you feel that unmistakable crawling anxiety up your spine. And it's nearly impossible to be a skeptic when you get home and discover 3 angry red scratches on your arm that weren't there when you went in. Hoya Batsu is a place of contradictions. Some see a beautiful forest. Others see a gateway to hell.
The most haunted house in the USA. Today we visit a place that has long been classified as the most haunted place in the USA. The history is extremely dark and great suffering has taken place here. But is everything really as it seems? Or are there lies about this place hiding in the shadows? In St. Francisville, Louisiana, just north of Baton Rouge, lies a plantation that has become a dark legend, Myrtle's Plantation. It has been called America's most haunted home, a place where it is whispered that at least 10 murders have been committed, a place that draws ghost hunters, mediums, and the curious from all over the world, all in a desperate hunt for echoes of a brutal and bloody history. The house was originally built in 1796, but its beauty is a mask. Beneath the neat facade hides a history of unspeakable human suffering, agonizing diseases, and unsolved murders. The beauty is merely an invitation to the darkness waiting inside. The very doors bear a warning. The glass is etched and painted with patterns of French crosses. According to tradition, they were placed there to ward off evil. The question is, were they trying to keep something out, or were they trying to keep something in that was already there? Why is this specific place so steeped in death? Why has it become a magnet for tragedy? Some legends claim the house never had a chance, that it was built on ground that was already hallowed and desecrated. Stories whisper that the plantation was erected directly on top of a Native American burial ground belonging to the Tunica people. If this is true, the very first act performed on this site was an act of deep disrespect, a curse laid before the first stone was even in place. This original sin has become a convenient explanation for the horrors that would follow. It is a classic trope in American horror. The ground is sour. But at Myrtle's Plantation, this legend may just be a shadow, a smokescreen hiding the real human source of the horror. The true evil didn't need an ancient curse. It arrived with the people. The man who built the house was no peaceful settler. His name was General David Bradford, but in Pennsylvania, where he came from, he was better known by another name, Whiskey Dave. Bradford was a well-known lawyer and businessman, but he was also a wanted man. He was one of the primary leaders of the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, an armed uprising against the American government accused of treason. He fled for his life, hunted by federal troops. So, in 1796, in what was then lawless Spanish West Florida, he found his sanctuary. He built a house he called Laurel Grove. The place we now call the Myrtles was not intended as a home. It was a hideout, built by a man on the run from justice. The house was born of conflict and lawlessness. The foundation was laid by a man fleeing the consequences of his own violent actions. He set a tone. He ran from his own violence, only to create a new sanctuary that was immediately built upon another, systematic violence, the slavery required to run the plantation for cotton and indigo. This cycle of violence, denial, and hidden secrets was built into the walls of the house from the very first spade of dirt. Every haunted place has a name whispered more often than others, a face that defines its horror, a spirit that becomes the symbol of all suffering. At Myrtle's Plantation, that name is Chloe. The legend begins after Bradford's daughter, Sarah Matilda, and her husband, Clark Woodruff, took over the plantation. Clark, a respected judge, is said to have taken one of the house slaves, Chloe, as his mistress. But Chloe, terrified of losing her privileged position in the house, afraid of being banished to the brutal, inhumane work of the fields, became paranoid. She began eavesdropping at keyholes, desperate for information. One day, inevitably, she was caught. Judge Woodruff was furious. As punishment, and as a terrible warning to all others, it is said he ordered one of her ears to be cut off. From that day on, Chloe was forced to hide her mutilation and her shame. She wore a green turban, which came to be a symbol of her pain, her humiliation, and her growing, burning hatred. Chloe was desperate. She had to win back her place, to prove her worth. She devised a terrible plan. For a birthday party, for one of Woodruff's daughters, she baked a cake. Into the cake, she mixed a poison. Extract from the deadly poisonous oleander leaves. Some versions of the myth, those trying to find a shred of humanity in the darkness, say she didn't mean to kill. Her plan, it is said, was only to make the family sick, so that she, and only she, who knew the cure, could nurse them back to health and become an indispensable heroine. But Chloe was no pharmacist. She was a desperate woman, and her dose was lethal. The legend, in its most famous form, says that Sarah Woodruff and two of her children ate the cake. Within hours, they were dead in terrible, violent agony. The judge himself, the target of her plan, didn't touch it. When the other slaves on the plantation realized what Chloe had done, they were seized by collective panic. They were terrified that the judge, in his rage, would punish them all for her crime. To prove their own loyalty, and in a desperate attempt to save their own skins, they formed a lynch mob. They dragged Chloe from her bed in the middle of the night. They judged her on the spot. They hanged her from one of the great oak trees, leaving her to dangle there as a warning. After she died, they cut down her body. To ensure she would never find peace, they weighed her down with rocks and threw her remains into the dark, cold waters of the Mississippi River. No crime, no trial, no burial, just an echo of brutal violence and a spirit trapped in eternal rage, condemned to wander the place that stole her life. It is a terrible, captivating, and perfect ghost story. It explains everything. The woman in the green turban, seen wandering the corridors, the inexplicable crying of children echoing in the halls. It has made Myrtle's plantation world famous, and there is just one tiny problem with it. It is a lie, every single word. The reality at Myrtle's plantation needs no ghost stories to be horrifying. The real history, the one hidden in archives and beyond the script of the guided tours, is in many ways darker, more tragic, and infinitely more uncomfortable than the legend. Historians and researchers have spent countless hours methodically going through the plantation's records. The public records in St. Francisville are meticulous. They list the names of all enslaved people owned by the Woodruff family. The name Chloe, or even Cleo, does not appear anywhere. There is absolutely no evidence that Judge Woodruff had an affair or that he committed the horrific act of mutilating one of his slaves. On the contrary, everything indicates he was deeply attached to his wife and was so devastated by her death that he never remarried. The legend of Chloe, as we know it, seems to have never existed. So, what happened to Sarah Woodruff and her children? They were not poisoned. The truth is more tragic, and for that time, horrifyingly common. Burial records and family notes show the truth beyond all doubt. Sarah Matilda Woodruff died on July 15, 1823. Her two children, Cornelia and James, did not die from poison either. They died a full year later, in 1824. They didn't even die at the same time. The cause of death was not oleander. It was yellow fever, a terrible, mosquito-borne viral disease that mercilessly ravaged Louisiana. It caused an agonizing, slow death and was a constant, impersonal terror in the South. The real horror is not a singular, dramatic act of revenge. The real horror is the mundane, impersonal, and inevitable death that could strike anyone at any time. The Chloe legend is a melodrama. It gives the meaningless deaths a narrative purpose, a cause and effect. Reality is much more frightening. There is no meaning, just a disease that takes a mother, and then, a year later, patiently comes back for her children. This sense of total helplessness is a much deeper and more authentic source of grief than an invented murder mystery. The legend told by guides insists that at least 10 murders have taken place in the house. This has been a cornerstone of Myrtle's reputation as a paranormal hotspot. But the historical records are, once again, a disappointment for those seeking blood. There is only one single confirmed documented murder at Myrtle's plantation. His name was William Winter. He had married into the Sterling family, who owned the house after the Woodruffs. On January 26, 1871, while Winter was teaching Sunday school in his own home, he heard someone calling for him from outside, a stranger on a horse. Winter went out onto the side porch to see what the man wanted, and was immediately shot. And now we come to the second great legend, the story told on the tours, the one that defines the house's most famous haunting, that the mortally wounded Winter stumbled into the house, through the hall, and began climbing the grand staircase in a desperate final attempt to reach his wife, that he collapsed and died in her arms, exactly on the 17th step. An incredibly dramatic, heartbreaking scene. But newspaper articles and historical sources from that time are completely unambiguous. William Winter did not stumble up any stairs. He collapsed and died right there on the porch. His bloody journey through the house never took place. The murder remained unsolved. But the real story is, as is so often the case, darker than the ghost story. It was shortly after the Civil War, a time of immense social and political tension. Some sources speculate that the murder was connected to the Ku Klux Klan. It is said that Winter was a vocal opponent of the Klan. This was likely not a random robbery. It was a political execution. The true story of the only murder at the Myrtles is not a romantic ghost story. It is a brutal tale of the real racist terrorism that defined the South during the Reconstruction era. So where exactly did these fantastic stories come from? Research points to a much more modern era. It wasn't until the 1950s that ghost stories began to circulate in earnest. A new owner, Marjorie Munson, bought the house and began reporting her own experiences of apparitions and voices. She heard local stories about an old woman in a green bonnet. Note, an old woman, not a young mistress, and wrote a song about it. But it was in the 1970s when James and Frances Kermeen Myers bought the house and turned it into a bed and breakfast that the myths exploded and took the form they have today. Frances wrote the book The Myrtles Plantation, the true story of America's most haunted house, and cemented the bloody, false legends for all time. Owners have, for generations, deliberately presented facts and history that they know are patently false. The house is a perfect and terrifying example of dark tourism, where real historical tragedy is transformed, packaged, and sold as commercial entertainment. But this leads us to the most frightening question of all. If the legends are false, why do people continue to experience things? What is it that actually haunts Myrtle's plantation. Because even though the stories have been debunked, the experiences continue. Staff, guests, and paranormal investigators report a steady stream of unexplained phenomena. In the grand entrance, opposite the stairs, hangs a mirror. It has been in the house for over 200 years. Legend says it is the source of the haunting. According to old Southern tradition, all mirrors must be covered when someone dies to prevent the soul of the deceased from getting trapped. When Sarah and her children died, the myth says this mirror was forgotten, and now it is said their spirits are trapped inside. Visitors and staff constantly report seeing things in the reflection, figures moving in the background. But the most frightening thing of all are the handprints. They appear on the glass, small, childlike handprints, but they are not on the outside. They seem to come from inside the glass. The staff wipes and polishes, but they cannot be removed. It is claimed that the glass in the priceless mirror has been replaced several times, but the spots and handprints, they always return. On the first floor stands a piano. Guests and staff report again and again that it plays by itself. Often, it is not a beautiful melody, just a single, discordant chord, repeating over and over in the middle of the silent night. When someone enters the room to investigate the sound, the music stops immediately. And then we have the stairs. We know, based on facts, that William Winter died on the porch. He never took a single bloody step up these stairs after he was shot. Yet, the absolutely most common auditory phenomenon reported at Myrtle's is heavy, desperate footsteps. Steps heard going up the stairs. Steps that stop exactly on the 17th step. And this is perhaps the deepest, most shocking insight of all. The haunting follows the false legend. The fact that Winter demonstrably didn't die there, but that the phantom steps still follow the fabricated story, suggests something much more complicated and frightening than a simple residual haunting. It suggests that decades of storytelling, of guides and owners creating and repeating a lie, have charged the place with so much collective psychic energy that the place itself, or something in the place, has begun to act out the false history. The legend has created its own ghost, and the experiences continue, night after night. Guests brave enough to stay overnight report a barrage of paranormal activity. Furniture that has moved when they turn their backs, beds that suddenly begin to shake violently in the middle of the night. One guest reported she inexplicably lost an earring, only to be told by staff that it is one of the tricks the spirits play. They like to steal small items. Others wake up, paralyzed with fear, seeing a woman in a turban standing and staring at them by the bedside. Many become so scared they cannot last the whole night. They flee in the middle of the darkness, leaving their belongings behind. And then we have this, the most famous proof of Chloe's existence. Taken in 1992, it shows what looks to be a translucent, ghostly figure of a woman in slave clothing. Is this Chloe, caught on film? Or is it just pareidolia? Or is it perhaps the ghost of the real haunting, the old woman in the green bonnet that the Williams family spoke of in the 1950s, long before the Chloe legend was even conceived? Perhaps this is the original spirit that Marjorie Munson sensed, and which later, for commercial reasons, was given the name Chloe. Myrtle's plantation is undoubtedly haunted. Few who have been there deny the heavy, sorrowful energy, but it is not haunted by the simple, neat ghosts of campfire stories. It is haunted by the cold, hard truth. It is haunted by the nameless victims of yellow fever. It is haunted by an unsolved, violent political murder, and above all, it is haunted by the accumulated, silent weight of the unspeakable, everyday, and systematic suffering of the hundreds of enslaved people who lived, worked, and died on this land. The real horror at Myrtle's plantation is not that the Chloe legend is true. The real horror is that it was needed, that we as a society would rather embrace a melodramatic and false story about a single, vengeful ghost than dare to turn around and confront the real, vast, impersonal, and deeply uncomfortable horror of our own history. Thank you for watching Bedtime Chillers. The real horror is rarely found in invented legends, but in the history we have actively tried to forget. What do you think haunts the Myrtles? The fabricated lie or the brutal truth? Leave a comment below. If you appreciated this journey into the past, show your support by giving the video a like. And, if against all odds you haven't already, subscribe for more deep dives into the darkness. Right now, I am working on the series The World's Most Haunted Places. You don't want to miss that.